January 24th, 1998. A powder room floor in a quiet New York apartment. That is where a husband collapsed and never got back up. Just weeks earlier, his family had celebrated one last Christmas together, not knowing it would be their final one. The woman standing at the center of this story was not just anyone. She was America's sweetheart. Every single morning, millions of people woke up and invited her into their living rooms. She smiled through the cameras. She made the whole country laugh. She felt like a friend, but behind that smile something was quietly breaking. Her husband, Jay Monahan, had been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Doctors gave them 9 months. 9 months to say goodbye while she still had to show up every morning, put on makeup, and smile for the cameras like nothing was wrong. Overnight, she became a single mother, 2 little girls. 1 and 6 years old, and a grief most people could never fully understand. But what happened next changed everything. Instead of hiding her pain, she made a choice almost no celebrity had ever made before. She turned her most private tragedy into a public mission. She let the cameras follow her into one of the most personal medical procedures a person can go through live, in front of the entire country. No one expected this kind of courage from a morning show host, and that single decision would go on to save thousands of lives. But her story does not stop there. Just 3 years after losing her husband, tragedy came back, this time even closer. And what she said, standing at that second funeral, would become one of the most quietly powerful moments of her entire life. This is the real story, the one behind the smile. She was not born into fame. She started as an assignment editor, chasing stories at the bottom of the ladder, working her way up job by job, city by city. By 1991, she had landed the seat that would change her life, co-host of a major national morning show. And almost instantly the country fell in love with her. She had something rare. Warmth, sharp intelligence, and a sense of humor that made even the hardest news feel human. She was not just reporting stories. She was talking to the whole country like a friend. For 15 years, she was the most trusted face in American mornings. She sat across from presidents, royalty, grieving families. She became one of the highest paid, most recognized journalists in television history. From the outside, it looked perfect. A dream career, a loving husband, 2 beautiful daughters. The kind of life people put on magazine covers, but fame has a strange way of hiding pain. In 1997, doctors delivered a diagnosis that would split her entire life in 2. Before that day and everything that came after, she kept working, she kept smiling on camera, because that is what you do when millions of people are counting on you every single morning. But underneath the studio lights, she was watching the man she loved slowly slip away, and she was doing it almost entirely alone. No one at work knew. Her colleagues had no idea what she carried home every single night, and it was about to get so much harder. By the fall of that year, his condition had turned serious. She found herself doing something no one trains you for, running a national broadcast by day and fighting to save her husband's life by night. She still remembers one Thanksgiving. The hardest one of her life. The family gathered trying to hold on to something that felt like normal, but normal was already gone. The man who once played college football now sat on the sidelines, too weak to join the game, his head bare from chemo, refusing to admit just how sick he had become. She kept repeating the same words to herself again and again. We will figure this out, but somewhere deep down she already knew the truth no one wanted to say out loud. 2 little girls needed their mother to hold everything together. A national audience needed her to show up and smile, and a dying husband needed her more than ever before. She was being pulled in 3 directions at once, and there was no manual for any of it. What she did not know yet was just how little time was actually left. The final months moved faster than anyone was ready for. His body, worn down by 9 brutal months of fighting, could barely function anymore. Then, on January 24th, 1998, it happened. He collapsed on the floor of their home, gone at just 42 years old, leaving behind a wife and 2 little girls who would grow up without their father. Overnight, the woman millions of people watched every morning became a widow, and a single mother trying to figure out how to keep breathing, let alone keep working. But here is where the story takes a turn no one saw coming. She did not disappear to grieve quietly behind closed doors. Instead, she made an extraordinary choice. She decided to take her deepest pain and turn it into something that could protect other families from the same nightmare. Colon cancer often goes undetected because people are too afraid, too embarrassed to get screened. She knew that fear firsthand. So in the year 2000, she did something no major television host had ever done before. She underwent the procedure live on national television in front of millions of viewers. It was raw. It was uncomfortable, and it worked in a way almost nobody expected. Screening rates across the entire country went up. Doctors started calling it the Katie Couric effect. A grieving widow had turned her worst nightmare into a movement that saved lives. But just when it looked like she was finally finding her footing again, life delivered another blow. One that would test her all over again. Only 3 years after losing her husband, she received news that shattered her a second time. Her older sister, a rising political star, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive, deadly cancers there is. For a family that had already buried one person to this disease, it felt almost impossible to survive twice. She watched her sister's health decline rapidly, even as her sister's career was reaching new heights. A cruel, cruel timing that no one could have predicted. Her sister died later that year at just 54 years old. At the funeral, she stood to deliver the eulogy. Those close to her sister knew something painful, that she often felt overshadowed, constantly asked if she was related to the famous Katie Couric. So in that room, in front of everyone grieving, she said something that stunned the entire room into silence. She said she would always be proud to be known as her sister's sister. It was quiet. It was powerful, and behind it stood a woman who had now lost a husband and a sister to cancer in just 3 years. Anyone would have broken under that kind of loss. But instead of retreating, she made a choice that would define the next 2 decades of her life. She ran straight toward the fight instead of away from it. She helped build a research organization in her husband's memory. Then, years later, she co-founded one of the largest cancer fundraising alliances in television history, bringing together rival networks and top scientists for a single cause. Grief had become her mission, but her story with cancer was still not finished. Her career kept climbing. In 2006, she made history, becoming the first woman ever to solo anchor a major network's evening news broadcast. She moved through other networks, built her own media company. Even made history again as the first woman to guest host one of America's most iconic game shows. In 2014, she found love again and quietly remarried. After everything she had survived, it finally looked like peace had found her. But then, in 2022, the story that had shaped her entire adult life came back around in the most personal way imaginable. On her wedding anniversary of all days, she received her own diagnosis, breast cancer. She later described that exact moment. Standing in the middle of an open office, the room spinning, whispering questions to herself she could barely process. Would she need surgery? Would she need chemo? What would the coming months even look like? For a woman who had spent over 2 decades helping other people face this exact fear, it was finally, terrifyingly, her turn. But this time, she was not alone in the dark the way she had been decades earlier. She had knowledge, she had support. She had a husband standing beside her through every step of recovery. She underwent surgery, she began treatment. And once again, instead of hiding it, she chose to share her diagnosis with the world, urging people, especially women, to stop putting off their appointments. The woman who once turned her husband's death into a movement was now turning her own diagnosis into another wake-up call for millions. Today, at 69 years old, she has survived more loss than most people could imagine carrying, let alone surviving with grace. A husband, a sister, her own health, all tested by the very same disease. She is still married, still watching her daughters live their own lives, still writing, still working, still using her voice. What began as one of the most painful chapters imaginable became the foundation of a legacy that has genuinely saved lives. Because in the end, her story was never really about fame. It was about what a person chooses to do with pain that could have destroyed them. So here is the real question. What do you think gave her the strength to keep showing up again and again after everything she lost? Would you have had the courage to share something so personal with millions of complete strangers the way she did? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe, because there are more stories like this one still waiting to be told.